what is the most important skill to develop for building wealth?
I love this question. I love this question so much. I spent time thinking about it. I was like thinking granular. I was going macro, and like I come down and I've brought it down to, I think, one. I've got one here.
One. See, I split it out. Like a very first thing that I'm like, is there complementary business owner skills and wealth creation skills? And I really found out that like the skills required to be a successful business owner is very, 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 very different to the skills that are required to be successful at building your own wealth. And so I'm actually super excited to hear what you're going to walk through, because when I thought through that, I'm like, yeah, this is not going to be a typical answer that a lot of people provide.
All right, you ready? I actually wrote these. I've come up with, so I've got three that are kind of linked together. But I'm going to say I think the most important skill business owners, or everyone really, needs to develop is long-term thinking.
Do you think delayed gratification in that, or just long-term thinking?
Well, do you know, funnily, delayed gratification was my runner-up. Then my third place was risk management.
Fair.
So I think what I've seen quite commonly is the people that have been like mega successful at building wealth have been the ones where they've been able to take a long-term view and then work towards that. So they don't like sway in the moment of the day-to-day or whatever the latest news is. Right. So like they've got this very like, because time is the biggest factor. Right. So when you look at, let's say, people who've built wealth, it's this compounding effect of like they get gains year on year and that compounds into it.
Yep.
Now, when someone's like short-term thinking is like they never take advantage of that. So those assets never get to compound in the right way, where the person who adapts a long-term thinking kind of mindset is like they don't sway away from that. They allow it to keep happening. So is delayed gratification a part of that? Definitely. A lot of people are taking like the money they've got in their hands now and not spending it on something that is for, let's say, in the moment enjoyment, and going, I'm going to put this aside for a better future. And like that plays into it hugely.
It was actually interesting. There was a large mining company, and I won't name his name because I'm friends with one of the executives that used to work there. And what they actually did was they took a whole heap of their leaders and management team and they put them through this evaluation process. There's some company that does it in the States, and all it is a full day like psychiatric evaluation to understand how far ahead you think. And we're talking like, do you think 1 month ahead? Do you think 1 year ahead? Do you think 20 years, 50 years, 100 years? And interestingly enough, when like Barack Obama did this, it was like 50 to 100 years. So decisions he was making today, he was always thinking about the ramifications that was going to have in 50 to 100 years. And fascinatingly enough, there was a 30-year-old at the time that went through this, and they found that he had like a 30 or 40 year ahead thought process on all of the actions that he had today. And so they grabbed him and actually promoted him, because obviously these people decide where the company is going and are going, great, the decisions you make today, we want to make sure that we're reaping the rewards over the next 20, 30, 40 years. And that's what we need in leadership. And so it was actually really interesting to see that they were using that as a barometer of the people who are going to drive success in a business. And so I can only imagine just how valuable that is in wealth creation, right?
Huge. I think this probably does translate across into business as well, right? Because if you imagine the person who's just trying to make money this week, it's a very, very different mentality to someone who's trying to be successful over the next 30 years.
Yeah.
Very different.
But I think it automatically changes someone's mindset from like going out and trying to play the status game today versus trying to play a wealth game. Like it's almost like no one who's thinking about the future is trying to play a status game today. Right? Because they're completely opposed based on the actions that you're doing now versus like, am I going to try and show you that I'm like got a better status than you've got? Well, no, I'm going to wait for 10, 20, 30, 40 years. That's interesting because I took this from a very different approach. So I was looking at different skills such as like financial and analytical, economics and markets, wealth concepts and sort of frameworks, knowledge of different types of assets and asset awareness, education, research, all of these different things. And I came back and I kept saying to myself, I'm like, imagine that you dumped me in an economy or in a market that I had no idea about. How would I make sure that I could build wealth better than anybody else? And I'm like, great. Found some foundational knowledge is always a good thing. Some awareness of how to read sort of financial figures is a good thing as well. But I came back and said that the number one thing for me was education and research. So if I could learn about any market or about any asset with the support of a really good ability to research, which I think are coincided to the one-in-one. Education is not just the concept of learning, but it's also going out there and finding the information. I think it's paramount because it means that you have the ability to find the right information, right? Which I think a lot of people sort of struggle with at the moment, where they get information and they take that as sort of gospel, if you will, and they'll invest based off it. So, Channel 9 said this about interest rates. That's gospel. And it's like, well, no, that's not research. That's not education. Go out there, look at people's myths, look at their personal biases, try and find the incorrect information that doesn't validate. I think if you have those fundamentals, you could literally crush it in not just business, but wealth in general, whether you're applying it to crypto, to property, to the share market, etc., because you can out-research anybody else, where you can just consume knowledge and consume information as a really good core foundation.
That's really interesting. I knew we would go about this very differently. I love how you thought about that, though. I really do. I want to ask a follow-up question there. When you look at the business owners you deal with today, or just in general, how many of them do you think actually spend time researching and educating themselves?
Minimal. Like I think they will do like a generic education. I shouldn't say minimal. They probably read the same books. So 9 out of 10 entrepreneurs, I can guarantee, or business owners, I can guarantee you they've read like a Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and like maybe like a book called like Traction and things like that. So they do read and they do educate, but from a wealth perspective, like none. Like it's such a small amount, maybe outside of like a barefoot investor or like a Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and like that's it. Like that's the whole extent of their wealth education.
If you think when a business starter starts, right? So when they first get into business, how much time they're spending in this like learning and educating phase, it's huge. And I find it interesting that as people go on in years in business, the amount of time they spend on education and research becomes less in general.
Well, I always relate it back to our educational system has always got tiers. And so everybody sort of perceives education as getting to a point where you don't really need to do it anymore. Right, so we go to, grade 6 to get into high school, go to high school into year 12 to get into university, and then we get out of university and we've got a job. Like that's what's inbred in us. And then the education doesn't necessarily need to continue from there, because the way that we earn more, the way that we progress more is via professional education, which is at university, or by working more. All right, you've worked at this company for 10 years, great, go and you'll get a better job, you'll get paid more, another company will come and hire you. So I actually think that it's almost ingrained in a lot of people, whether they like it or not, to think that education is like a destination. It's not like a lifelong journey.
So how do you view it for yourself?
Yeah, so for me, if I'm not learning something, or I'm not trying to consume more information, I'm already falling behind, because there are so many more people coming into every industry, into every market, whether it's business or investments or otherwise, and they will know more than me. And they will make better decisions and better educated choices over and above myself, just because they've got more information and they're better well-read, etc. So I carve out some kind of education, whether it's about wealth creation, whether it's about fundamentals, whether it's about business, etc. I always educate myself every single day, bar none.
See, it's so interesting, right? This is this whole like fixed mindset thing as well, because I think people forget, and I'll put this into play, right, is the idea that if, let's just say you were a boomer, right? And I know we're going to talk about them later, so I'll throw them in here. Let's pretend you had a business and like you're a boomer. This is pre-internet, right? And you've gotten to this point where you're running a pretty successful business and you think you know all you need to be successful at this business. So you stop educating yourself. Yep. Now, that might have been fine if the world doesn't change, but then the internet comes along and then the world changes. I think a lot of good business owners pre-internet got smashed because when the environment changed and new technology came in, suddenly they weren't the educated ones who knew how to run this business well.
Yep.
The people who knew how to take advantage or did take advantage of new technology and educated themselves on that become the ones to unpick them. So I kind of look at it and like I make sure I have that situational awareness, because if I think it's a leading indicator for me that if I'm not educating myself, the chances are is that I'm headed towards a stagnation, and like some little whippersnapper, or maybe even you, or someone who's willing to put in that education is going to come into an environment where they're so much more well-equipped to take advantage of the opportunities of today than I am. Like education, the way I think about it, is giving yourself the ability to seize and capitalize on opportunities.
Yep.
Like that's the benefit of it.
But how many people do you think are making decisions based off what they get in their news or newspaper?
Broad strokes, I'm going to say majority.
And that's the problem. And that is like the underpinning to everything that we're sort of talking about when it comes to like research and education. Because where do you go to get unbiased, unopinionated, non-entertainment based education to make decisions on your wealth? And if you can answer that question, then you're already one up on everybody else.
You also have to like take a student mentality to it as well, right? It's like, and as you go further and you're more successful in life, the more inclined you are to think that you're killing it and like you don't need to learn anything. Like you're the master, not the student. But the reality is that you're probably a student in other areas of your life.
Yep.
And trying to remain that humility. I had a mentor very early on, and he did pass on one thing that I thought was like fascinating to me at the time. He's like, just find people that have done it and copy the fuck out of them.
That's it. Just do that.
Just do that. I always thought it was interesting, but when it comes to like, as you said, like finding the source of truth, I've become hugely biased towards, or look at someone's like results and then look to what they're doing. And funnily enough, it's often quite very different than what might be the common knowledge or is accepted out in like the news or whatever else.
Yeah. And I just look at this, and in the last episode, we were talking about interest rates, where the knee-jerk reaction of everybody based on what the news was giving to them was, oh man, this is horrible. Everything's doom and gloom. Expenses going up and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, yeah, but if you did some better research, you did some better education. As a matter of fact, if you applied your long-term thinking to this with some better education and research, you'll actually go, yeah, no, this is probably just going to be short-term, no worries at all. How do I weather the storm? Or how do I take advantage of opportunities that are here? It's almost like both of them are so well in line.
Maybe they play into each other here, right? So if you're a long-term thinker, maybe you would research and educate yourself differently because you would be preparing for a long-term future. Where if you're let's say you're just thinking about making it through this week, what's the point of educating yourself? Like what can you really take on this week?
Exactly.
Hey, fellow business owner, if this topic and value-packed short video has resonated with you at all, and you want to dive deeper into being a full stack business owner, check out the full episode by clicking the link on your screen or in the description right now.